Thank you everyone for joining the Boston Office 365 user group meeting today. We have a few intro slides before we dive into the main topic. If anyone's looking to connect to the Wi-Fi, the guest code is at the bottom of this screen, as well as on the placard up here. So in terms of the organizers, my name is Dimitri. I am one of several organizers. Along with me, we have Bill, Mike, and Dave. So in terms of tonight's agenda, we'll keep this consistent with our typical flow, where we'll start off with some updates that have occurred in Microsoft 365 since the last time that we've met. We're going to dive into the featured speaker and Joel's pretty exciting session that we have lined up. Then we're going to go into a bit of a Q&A, some community topics, and then we'll close this out with a raffle and an optional social event at the Marriott bar across the street. So for those that weren't able to join us last month, DRC Reed, formerly Hess, gave a great session on designing for the age of AI. If you have not had a chance to watch that live with us, it is available on our YouTube channel, along with pretty much all other recordings ever since we started recording several years ago. So in terms of Microsoft updates, of course, we can't cover all of the updates in this next 5-minute segment, but we'll cover some of the ones that we think are most interesting to our audience. So the first thing is Microsoft Copilot for M365 is now starting to roll out equivalent experiences into the Outlook Classic version, which is the Outlook version that just about everybody that I know, myself included, still use. So previously the summarize feature was available. Now the drafting options and the coaching options are also becoming available. So if you have that Copilot for M365 license, you should see this appearing within your Outlook very soon. Moving forward, there's a new feature coming to Copilot for Microsoft 365 called the catch-up feature. So if you go into the Copilot tab within Teams or within your browser, you'll now see a bunch of things that Copilot thinks you might be benefiting from catching up on. Whether it's a presentation that was shared with you, whether this was a meeting that you have coming up where you want help preparing and getting up to speed for what's needed for what will be discussed. And essentially just bringing in another easier way of, instead of you going to a file and saying summarize it, it's more proactively coming to you and saying, hey, this is what might be of interest, might make your life a little bit easier. There's a new deployment pack available for Viva Amplify to help you with your Microsoft 365 Copilot rollout. Just a quick show of hands. Is anyone using Viva Amplify? Anyone heard of Viva Amplify? A few people. So Viva Amplify is more of the internal communications module within Viva, and it helps you do things like plan communications, scheduling, reviewing drafts, and essentially kind of coordinating the timelines of different events that need to occur for a publication, a campaign, and so forth to go out. Another feature that's rolling out is going to enable organizers of team meetings to be able to define their AI policies on a meeting-by-meeting level. Today, a lot of these controls are available on the tenant level where you could enable them or disable them. But now, for example, I can decide that if I'm entering a boardroom meeting, perhaps I want to turn some of this transcription services off, and I could do that without having to change a tenant policy. Moving forward, there's a few updates that are coming to Microsoft Stream. Does anyone use the new Stream that's in SharePoint? Kind of have to if you're recording meetings in Teams. So there was a challenge that Microsoft identified where if within a Stream video, you come in there and you add bookmarks or you modify the metadata inside of the video file, it would create a new SharePoint version of that file, essentially doubling or adding on the size of the video against your storage every time you made a change. So Microsoft is making a change to say that anytime you make a change of something inside the file, like the title, the description, the bookmarks, they're no longer going to track those metadata changes in the version history. And by doing so, they're only going to keep your version of the file one time. And now, if you're having SharePoint metadata columns, things like a SharePoint title or a SharePoint custom metadata field that you add, that will continue to function exactly as it is today. But things within Stream will hopefully start to reduce how much space they take up. Separately, there's a new feature coming out for Stream where content creators can now get more engagement metrics. So if you have videos that have links, polls, other callouts, and so forth, you can see how many people or percentages of people that are interacting with those different methods that you're adding onto the screen to help you decide what's working well with your audience and what is not. Moving forward, so a few quick updates from Intune. Apple is expected to release new versions of iOS, iPadOS, and macOS this year. Microsoft supports the current version and the previous two. So this announcement is essentially telling everyone that you should probably consider upgrading to iPadOS 16 or higher and macOS 13 or higher, just to make sure that you're going to continue to be in that supported state, when Apple releases the newest versions. This doesn't mean that your previous versions will break. It just means Microsoft will no longer support them. There's also a new change coming out in a couple of months to the company portal app. They're making it look a lot more modern and a lot more user-friendly. So keep an eye out for that update coming soon. Another feature that's coming out that I actually think is going to be super helpful, and this is a new way to RSVP to meetings. Initially, this appears to only be available for the web version and the new Outlook, but I'm crossing my fingers that this will make it to the classic quote-unquote Outlook as well. But the nice part here is that when you're going to reply to a meeting, not only can you specify yes or no that you'll attend, but you can also specify whether you're going to attend remotely or in person. And I think for a lot of teams that are trying to decide, is it worth coming to the office? Am I going to have a lot of presence within a given meeting? Do I need a big conference room or do I need a huddle room? This will be very beneficial. And last but not least, for these updates, we talked about this a bit after Ignite last year. Microsoft is introducing co-authoring within SharePoint pages, where yourself and others can now edit different parts of the page at the same time. And as you can see highlighted with the red blocks here, you're going to have different call-outs based on where other co-authors are editing or making additions on the page itself. Because of this, they essentially, if someone's editing the page actively and you try to publish, you will be given a warning that says others are working on this page. Are you sure you want to continue? And you have the ability to continue still. But it's nice because now we actually get co-authoring back for pages, or for the first time rather. This is coming out in August. So thanks to the company I work for, Turn Digital, for sponsoring. They help provide us with food for the meetings, as well as all the overhead of keeping us as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. That being said, we have the main event. So we have Joel to give us a little bit about preparing for M365 Copilot. Very on point for the updates that we have today. So Joel, I'll give it over to you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be able to connect with everyone there in Boston, and I hope we can make this an interactive session. I'm very interested in being able to share thoughts and be able to get to know everybody there, or dialogue on these topics. Let me give you a little background for those who don't know me. I spent about 10 years at Microsoft, working both in IT and on the technical marketing team. And I've been gone from there for about 10 years, where I've worked at some large enterprise organizations, including Blizzard Entertainment or Activision Blizzard. And I'm now at Sony Interactive and PlayStation. And what I do here is I actually just recently switched positions, where previously I was the product manager, product owner for all things the Microsoft stack, Google, Box, Slack, Miro, Figma. And now I'm the architect for all of those solutions, as well as more. So some things have changed, some things haven't changed, but now I'm more in a position to be able to say, here's where I was already doing that, but I was saying, here's where we're going, here's what we're doing, planning that vision and strategy. And as well, one thing that changed is now I own all things Gen AI as well. So both Copilot and ChatGPT Enterprise. I'm the architect for those technologies inside of PlayStation as well. So yeah. The other thing I'm excited to say is I'm a travel geek, and I finished the world in February, which means I visited every country in the world. So I got to my last one, made it to Libya finally, and I say finally because I've been working on that one for a few years, and the Department of State warned me not to go, and so I waited for a year after that warning, and then went anyway. But crazy, exciting, very very happy to have accomplished that goal at the same time. And a lot of that was actually speaking at conferences and connecting with the community around the globe. I am a Microsoft regional director, previous MVP. Not contributing as much as I used to because I'm fairly heads down now inside of Sony PlayStation. But at the same time, try and stick my head up every so often. And I do appreciate the invite to speak at the Boston User Group. This is my third or fourth time speaking at the Boston User Group, and probably at least 4 or 5, 6 if you count all the SharePoint Saturdays in the past, and M365 events. So it's exciting to reconnect with the community there in Boston. And I want to start with a diagram that I'm showing on my screen right now. I probably should have just done more video, and I think everybody can see my face too anyway. But basically, a lot of where we're at with Gen AI is is interesting. In fact, I'll start with this slide here. I think AI transformation requires security transformation. And so when we talk about preparing for Gen AI, a lot of what we need to do is we need to be thinking about governance. And it's fascinating to think about the word governance. I know a lot of people get analysis paralysis as it relates to governance. My recommendation is don't stop what you're doing. You need to keep going and doing what you're doing, but you need to make sure you're focused on discovering, protecting, governing your data. And hopefully, you're not just now thinking about securing your data. You've actually already been thinking about that. But now you need to be thinking about that from a perspective of how do I manage? How do I protect? How do I think about the user experience for my users as I'm preparing for the rollout of Copilot? Or Copilot's running, what kind of audit do I need to do against my data to make sure that the permissions are there? Copilot, kind of like when enterprise search started working, people kind of freaked out. It's like, oh, people can actually find that data. Security by obscurity doesn't work. And that's still the case. Security by obscurity is never a good plan. You should not be planning that way. You need to manage your permissions. And if you're simply the farm admin or you're responsible for governing the environment, you absolutely need to be thinking about it from a perspective of how do I protect my data? How do I govern my data? How do I discover what it is and properly label it? And the way that I've been kind of thinking about this is this idea of making sure that privacy and security are on board, that we've got some really good use cases that we're fleshing out, and that we're thinking about MFA and single sign-on and integration planning and all of these aspects as well as adoption and training, office hours, essentially thinking about how we're rolling this out department by department, and then thinking about integration and security and all that kind of jazz. Now this idea of, hey, how should we be thinking about our data? How should we be thinking about how we protect our data? So we've got all this data across the enterprise, all these SaaS-based services where we're storing our files, and our files being transferred back and forth, whether it's in Google or Outlook or Box or Slack or whatever. How are we protecting our data? And this idea of leveraging Purview information protection, where we can then say, let's get all the proper labels out so that when we're actually labeling our data, we're properly encrypting it. And what we want to do is ultimately, if we can leverage auto classification, that's fantastic. if we can train our users on protecting the data, that's great. But let me tell you, there are some challenges around that experience where users don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle this. And I'm going to jump out into a demo and just show you how confusing it is. And I do have the new preview of the new label experience. And so I want to show you what that looks like in the preview ring. And and then basically once the data has been labeled properly, the data is protected based on those policies. And that's where DLP, the data loss prevention actions such as blocking, such as encryption, maybe it's can't print, can't extract, can't use the APIs. You can actually use these policies to block Copilot even. And I'll give you a quick example of that. As well, then once the files have been protected and the labels are are essentially set up properly, then as the data then gets shared around and transferred around, whatever encryption labels were set or whatever labels were set, that protection is persistent and it travels with the data. And beyond that, with Azure Information Protection, there is that ability to, or the Purview Information Protection, being able to go into the Compliance Center. We can actually report on the data. We can understand what's abused. We can take action. We can remediate. There may be some incident reports and actions and alerts that you've set up in your DLP rules such that you can then do e-discovery. And as far as, or you can then remediate and address those things. And even update your DLP policies, improve what you're doing with your data. The other aspect of this is, hey, there's a good portion of your sites that are not being used, or your portion of your teams. What can we do to improve our experience with Copilot? It is essentially being able to optimize your data for that. And so I'm going to pop into a demo real quick. I want to just show you what this experience is like.
Joel, while you go into the demo, the sprawl is real. I mean, so many, and the thing is, and we're dealing with it at Staples as well, and we've ended up having to shut down, especially after December, shut down a lot of those different services to ensure that there's less points of possible entry. Do you see in your future the decrease of the surplus population of different SaaS tools, or are you going to utilize Purview to the nth degree to try to allow for the large plethora of different tools to continue to be used?
I think that's a really well said. I think that people who are looking for a silver bullet of one DLP to rule them all, one set of one solution that's going to solve it all. I feel like we should stop waiting for that, and we should actually leverage the tools we've got inside of our SaaS tools that we have now. I think that Microsoft does have, it creates a nice layer, especially if we kind of figure out, and what I'm saying here is like, figure out what your internal strategies are for your company. And most companies are going to have 3 or 4 tiers, whether it's your secret, top secret, confidential, internal, public. It's going to be something like that in every company. What you do at that next level to be able to say, is it required to be encrypted? Is it not required to be encrypted? Our ability to essentially decide what you want to be able to do, whether it's in email, your ability to say do not forward, encrypt the contents of this mail. But what I think is even more powerful beyond that is this idea of encrypted, requires authentication, and so that it's like it basically has that kind of phone home feature. So this next generation of labels that I'm working on right now are essentially going to say blocks Copilot on them, because essentially it'll be that prevents extraction right on the label, and essentially no API access, no encryption, or no extract. It's encrypted, and so essentially I can create a label type, and my intention as well with that is to make them predefined labels so that the users don't have to add users. And let me just give you kind of a quick example of if I choose a label, I then get this interface, and it's a little bit slow, and it'll come in just a second. And while we're waiting for that, this question of MIP, DLP, the third party, the hey, one to rule them all, this kind of experience is pretty rough. I think that we need to determine what our strategy is at the top level for our organization, and then in our different SaaS tools, we may then have to add our own DLP rules based on what's in those tools. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's never a silver bullet, especially when it comes to IT. But I was
Yeah.
definitely interested in seeing where you're going with your direction as far as leading the architecture for it.
Yeah, I do think that Microsoft, not knowing anything, so I'm not trying to spell things out, but it very much feels like Microsoft's recommendation of label your data, label your containers. And if you think about what we had in Viva Topics, you could essentially create whitelisting rules based on labels. Your ability to say these sites are included, these sites are not included. Unfortunately, with Copilot, it's the whole tenant is included, and our ability to say, hey, exclude these sites that are labeled like this. I think that's got to be something on their roadmap. And in the conversations I've had, that I think I could point to, have essentially been, I can't tell you when, I can't tell you how, but what you need to do is anything you do focus on in terms of labeling your data is going to benefit you in the future from a roadmap perspective. And in the meantime, how I've been approaching this is, well, let me make sure that I'm setting up my container labels and using DLP, and as well from a file perspective, that I'm essentially setting the no extract feature so the Copilot can't extract data out of those files in the meantime. And it's not that I'm turning that on everywhere, it's that I'm going to start doing auto classification for the most top secret stuff, so that when essentially DLP sees a keyword, it will auto classify those files if I've got super high confidence. If I don't, I'm going to encourage the user with a tooltip, and encourage them to classify the file. So jumping back into this demo, here's what the new UI looks like for our sensitivity labels, where we can pick a user as a viewer. And the good news is we now actually have a picking interface, where in the old one, you had to know what group or what user. And so now essentially I can pick a user, I can pick a group, and it even is fairly clearly saying they can't edit, print, copy content, or change, remove protection for the viewer role. For restricted editor, here I can choose and add users, and this can be multiple people. And this then will essentially allow them to edit where these people can only view. And this editor, so the restricted editor can't print, copy content, or change memory protection. Here, you can view, edit, print, and copy content, but they just can't remove the protection. And as owner, this is where you can do anything, including remove protection. And if you want to get granular, you can add your expiration. You can set up the request, this request additional permissions capability. And here's this required connection to verify the user's permission. Highly prefer and recommend this concept of, hey, it's going to phone home. It's going to make sure the user actually authenticates before they can access the file. And that's a big deal when you're trying to manage access to files. And what's interesting is today, once you've set up encryption on a file, that today it basically will essentially protect that file. And then if you're using Copilot, the plan, so basically the roadmap is that if you're using Copilot and you're using data from it, let's say you're in Word and you're pulling data from a file that is protected, and it allows you to extract content, it would then, by default, as you're taking it out of a document that's been protected, it will apply that same protection on that file. So that's one of the features they've already publicly been talking about that's coming. And I want to kind of stop there for a second. Does anybody have any questions about what it is we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing?
But Joel, the whole point of SharePoint is sharing. So if you store this document in a SharePoint library and then share that link directly, does this override the permissions?
So this is not permissions. That's an important thing to understand. Even though it says the word permissions here, this is not permissions. This is essentially rights protection. So you could put the entire company here in editor, but if you're storing it in SharePoint, whatever the SharePoint permissions are, it's least privilege. So if I'm restricting everybody here as viewer and then I stick it in SharePoint, the most they can do is view. If I put everybody here in edit and then I do my permissions properly on SharePoint, only those who can edit can edit. It's cumulative permissions, essentially.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? The other thing here is if I open up an Outlook email and I toss this in here, same kind of thing applies. These are essentially rules inside of the file as to who can do what with this file, but those overwrite whatever environment I put it into. If I set this up and I go put it in box, and whatever permissions there are in box, it'll be those plus whatever is restricted, or whatever kind of restrictions I put in here.
So Joel, I had a question. How do you view who the file's been shared with from this rights protection? You have to open the file up? Can you see it from SharePoint? Like, what's the different ways you can kind of like get back to the screen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in this case of users can request additional permissions, here this is, if I kind of kept this fairly restricted and just set it to view, and then people would have to ask if they want to do stuff to it. There is an interface essentially for this ability to ask me, where it'll send me an email of who's looking for access. Otherwise, I'm storing it on SharePoint, and then that ability to see it. There is some stuff in Purview as it relates to who has seen what has happened, that whole audit experience. So yes, there are audit logs as well from a Purview perspective. And I would welcome anybody on the call who has any additional insights into that, who has viewed what aspect of this. If anybody wants to chime in, I know we've got some smart people. on the call.
Good to go.
Currently at Staples, the way we're using labels is specific to Microsoft Teams, more specifically O365 groups. The way it is, we have four different levels of classification, and depending upon which type of classification they go for, they'll either allow external, internal, or private utilization, depending on which one they choose. And that's kind of how we've been ruling it from that aspect. As far as what you're showing, Joel, we still have a ways to go. We're still growing in that, but at least at the team levels, we've been able to start tying things down, which was an absolute necessity.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm just gonna pop into tenant, then I can show you what the admin UI looks like for the compliance center, and I can kind of show you a little bit of what you get. You can see I've been doing some testing here. In fact, while we're here, I do want to show you one really quick thing before I jump into the admin UI. If I go into my OneDrive, you'll see I've actually turned on some information protection, including this conditional access policy, where you can see the organization doesn't allow you to download, print, or sync anything using this device. And they're looking for marked compliant in Intune. So this is something that basically I was testing a policy against myself. But as well, if I look at some of these, if I go into my files, you'll see actually. So we've got some warnings and blocks set up, and these little this file may contain sensitive info. These are the DLP policies, so that I can mark it and say, hey, this file, so essentially we set it up, credit card numbers, and here you can see a little watermark as well that I set up for testing purposes. But if I'm trying to detect a code word or some kind of compliance policy kind of experience, you'll see here I've set up, this one is encrypted with watermark, permissions defined, and you can see there's some of the web labels here. I've obviously really been playing with this, but here we've got like disclosed, encrypted, authentication required. Like you can just really pile these things up in terms of what you can do, including those color coding of the labels themselves. Now we can actually add colors to them, and this idea as well, adding watermarks, adding additional controls. I kind of call them labels with teeth. It's like, what good is a label if the label only does labeling? Where if I can actually have a label that requires authentication, now there's 8 billion people in the world who can't access this document because I've restricted it to people who can authenticate with my tenant. And then I can restrict that further to say FTEs, and I can restrict that further to say only disclosed users or only top secret users, or even restricting it to some small group of executives, as an example. The other thing that I can do here in something called predefined labels, I can actually select a label, and that whole wizard thing that I had to do before, I don't have to do. Now, by simply choosing the label that's predefined, it now applies that policy and encryption, and the user doesn't have to figure out who should have read, who should have edit, and people get kind of overwhelmed with those questions of Was it do not preempt, do not extract? No, you can configure all that stuff in the tenant in a predefined label to then essentially restrict what you want to do, including blocking Copilot as an example, or allowing Copilot and being able to even call that out in your label itself. And yeah, if I pop to this admin UI, in the compliance, you'll see that we've got and I would highly encourage anybody who just has prod, you really, really, really need to get a pre-prod. You need to get a tenant that you can play around and get comfortable with all these rules. And one of the things I definitely want to highlight for you is something called AI Hub. And why do we care about AI Hub? Somebody was just asking about analytics. Our ability to be able to understand what's happening from a perspective of who's viewing what, who's doing what with what, especially as it relates to Copilot. Here we can actually get analytics, and I'll show you the screenshot since this one isn't set up properly, but I'm going to show you this AI Hub stuff. Yeah, it's right. It's actually right here. So what does AI Hub give you? It can actually give you, here's your total users who are creating stuff with prompts, and created a prompt and accessed high risk, medium risk, low risk, none. Users who visited other AI assistants. Here's your Google Bard, which now is Gemini, your OpenAI, your Bing Chat, and whatever. My understanding is in Defender for Endpoint now, they are tracking over 500 Gen AI tools that can essentially be potentially accessing your files. So if you're trying to keep your arms around your data, here we can see sensitive data shared with all AI assistants grouped by sensitive information type. Here's our data grouped by the sensitive info. And then we can view data details and kind of dive further in on that data. But as well, total number of prompts containing sensitive data shared with AI assistants. Now, a lot of what we're seeing here is part of a preview. This is not, I'd say it's still fairly early in its cycle, but what Microsoft is really trying to do is give us transparency around being able to understand our sensitive info types as well as our labeled data so that we can be more empowered with understanding what's happening and what's going on with our data. But if we haven't labeled anything and we haven't set up any sensitive info types, that's where there's very much a call to action in this session of, if you have anything to do with anything that we're talking about here, highly encourage you to, well, I did it in kind of multiple phases. The first phase was there was no harm in audit only. And I immediately rolled out 40 SITs, and that's a lot. That means ABA routing numbers, Swift codes, social security numbers, addresses, passwords. Like I almost tried to roll out all of them. Like my intention was, I want to know what's out there. And understanding it's super chatty, except for the fact that I told it to suppress it. It's like, I just want to label the data. It's not that I want to take action on it. That's the next phase. So that first phase of let's get audit only rolled out, then we'll create some new DLP policies based on the sensitive information types that we feel like is giving us good data. And some of my favorite ones are the ones that are actually listed here. Credit card numbers, social security numbers. So those were the first two that I started with. Was I want to say credit card numbers and social security numbers, those are fairly high confidence. I'm sure ABA routing numbers is not too bad as well. Bank accounts is probably pretty decent. Physical addresses, that's some PII data. I'm not sure I want to deal with that right now, but at least if I can kind of figure out based on financial data and then build confidence with our InfoSec team. Our ability to be able to say, this is what's going on. And if I can say that these things are found in a file, do I want to auto-classify it? Do I want to encrypt that file? Or do I want to at least, at a minimum, provide a tooltip? This is where I'm at. I want to provide a tooltip to my users that says, hey, you might want to consider labeling the data, and then encouraging them to recommend applying a label. But there's something I feel super high confidence with related to code words. And those code words, we know that's really sensitive data and that's our business. So we want to then auto-classify those ones where we know it's super high confidence and we absolutely want to be tracking these things and we want to get our arms around that data. And we want to know, as it relates to our assistants, what is going on with that sensitive data. So let me kind of pause there and let that sink in. And I know we were just talking about this kind of stuff. Tell me about Staples. Where are you? Where have you spent much time with? You mentioned your sensitive categories and labels. Have you done any auto classification?
That's going to be the next phase. We kind of had to put that in there. It's somewhat in a rush, but that is a project that I'm actually starting to put together right now, and that's the reason why your talk is so timely, because I'm just because right now I'm like furiously writing notes on a stone tablet right now, but
nice.
Honestly, it's something where I want to go is the auto classification, at least for top secret level stuff.
Right.
One of the things that we have actually blocked are the things like credit card information. We do not allow it. It will shut them down instantly because we do not want PII. We do not want PCI information in SharePoint because we have other systems specifically for that.
Awesome. Yeah. And yeah, I think a lot of us are in the same boat of how do we accelerate our program around classifying our data, labeling our data, and then being able to improve the reporting side of things and improving our incident management so that we can track data that's flying around inside the organization, better understanding what's happening.
I'll tell you one thing, the Copilot definitely was an eye-opener for some people. Fortunately, the first gen users were either SDS security or senior leadership. So it didn't fall into the wrong hands, but it definitely showed weaknesses in the security that was attached, and that's one of the reasons why the labels went to where they went as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of similar story. When we first did Copilot, we got 25 licenses. Greater Sony had a lot more than that, but inside of our operating company, the idea was let's get it in the hands of security, privacy, IT leadership, and then we decided there's a couple of executives we know have some really key use case scenarios. And we got it to a VP of HR who was very, very keen and is an early adopter. That VP of HR went crazy with it, loved it, and basically opened their checkbook. They were ready to get everybody in HR a license of Copilot. Privacy and security were like, hey, let's pump the brakes. We need to make sure all the permissions are correct. We need to make sure that the agreement is rock solid, as you would expect. And in IT, we were like, oh, this is fun stuff. We did the surveys, and we found that the industry and what Microsoft has been kind of sharing about, we had 95% of people that would give up their free lunch, for Copilot. They loved it, and there's absolutely an appetite for it. And so a lot of it was, okay, now what do we do? Let's figure out our adoption program. But in tandem, we really need to be focused on our preparing for Copilot strategy. And this preparing for Copilot strategy has been very much around what are our personas, what are our use case scenarios, and as well, how are we auditing our tenant and cleaning up data. And I understand how it's very easy to say and on and on and on the things that you've got to do or the things you should be doing. But I'm right now showing the Viva dashboard, the Copilot dashboard, that basically gives us an insight into understanding, oh, what's actually being used. People absolutely love the Teams features. Summarizing meetings is number one. People love the AI notes, the action items, and being able to essentially, I know I'm not unusual in that I jump into a meeting halfway through and I want to say, hey, recap. I need to know what's going on, and I use that a ton. And in our environment, it goes Teams, then Outlook, and the ability to summarize threads, the ability to generate a draft of an email. I do think people oversell that idea of creating documents and creating emails. I do think that the summarizing and simplifying and the catching up is more popular than, hey, I'm gonna draft something from scratch. It's absolutely great if you're thinking that way and you're like, hey, I don't know where to start. Let me just write something and then get it going. But in terms of governance, and especially as you're trying to build your business case, this report can help in a big way. And it can also, from a preparing perspective, if you're running a pilot, which is what I highly recommend, is starting with a small population of trusted folks that are going to give you feedback that you can then, kind of wrap your head around. What are they doing? How are they using it? Let's build out some of those use cases. And within a very short period of time, we have 175 use cases for how Gen AI is being used inside the organization that we can then use with executives to help them understand the value of what we're getting out of Gen AI. And that can be super valuable, both also from a perspective of governance and policies. And I want to show you one kind of one little thing here that I've got a couple decks that I'm borrowing from. Yeah, go ahead if somebody had a question.
No, Joel, we're good. Just some background chatter.
Yeah, this is something I put together around kind of that idea of there's your user population, and for the most part, we want our users who are essentially prompting and doing their prompt engineering. I kind of don't want them focused on secret and confidential, these top tiers in the organization. I want them being able to ask questions of the internal, unlabeled, public content. But there may be some smaller disclosed population that I do want to allow access to this data. But even then, there may be some of this secret data that I'm saying, you know what? No, I actually want to not allow extraction of content from these set of secret documents. So my intention over time is build up really solid sensitive information types that are trusted, encourage people to label the data, label the files and label the containers. So essentially, from a file perspective, whether it's an email or Outlook, OneDrive, and then in our container labels, I've been thinking, I want to get all of our containers labeled, because then I can do my own enforcement on top of whatever they're doing. And you'd say, well, how can you help them out? Well, if I can categorize sites to say these sites are internal, these sites are confidential, these sites are secret, that's great. But even better than that, if I can say these sites are internal and it's FTEs, or it's internal and it's a studio or multiple studios, if I can actually figure out who the audience is, maybe there's a site that is set up for vendors where we're doing some partner collaboration and they've got guests. My ability to label that, now I understand how the enforcement should be working from a DLP perspective, where we can say, let's set up a whitelist for this one studio or for this external studio we're working with, or for this partner or this vendor. Now, if I've set up a whitelist for their specific domain, now I can actually do enforcement and restriction on top of that. And from an insights perspective, we've got kind of this Purview AI hub. I can leverage Defender for Cloud Apps to understand AI usage against my data. And then I can also understand what's happening Copilot-wise broadly across the organization with the Insights dashboard. And I can tell which Gen AI tools I should and shouldn't be used inside the organization. And I can start locking stuff down as well. Yeah,
Joel,
go ahead.
One of the things that I would love to hear your opinion on is, this is a chicken or egg situation here. And I think you know where I'm going with this. One of the things that a lot of companies do is they want to do things like the labels, but at the same time, they have either no budget or no manpower to actually do the training to assist with that. So it's like, okay, do we do the training, or are we going to have to kind of implement it, but we're going to have to go completely automated, so that way they don't have to think, and then they can reach out to us if something is labeled incorrectly.
I like where you're going, and I like this whole line of thinking. What I've been doing is I've been saying, there's a certification process. I'm going to put a very, very powerful tool in your hands. I'm going to be handing you Copilot. As in the process of handing you Copilot, there's an acceptable use policy that goes along with that. And that acceptable use policy is essentially what the company is saying is okay to be done. And a good example of that may be, we don't want to generate code from AI. Maybe we only want to say it's okay to use AI to debug your code or to understand code. And so this story of when to use what, or do this, don't do that, I'm incorporating into my training. And the training is certification for being able to use the tool. So essentially what I've got now is a half-day workshop. If you're going to be getting GPT or Copilot, I'm actually signing you up for, you've got to take this training. You've got to take, basically you're essentially being, there's a certification to saying you're responsible with this AI tool. And part of that is going to be 15 minutes on us being able to cover labeling of your data, and basically the rollout of the tool includes how to protect corporate assets.
Interesting. One of the things that we end up doing is actually create our Staples security department actually created a governance document and a do's and don'ts sheet before we even released Copilot. And that was like passed literally across the boards because of ChatGPT and others. We didn't want to become another Samsung. And at the same time, a majority of them, right now we only have 300 licenses, and a majority of users do not currently have it, but they do have Bing Chat that's secured and locked down. but there's other things as well that, we have to be absolutely careful of. And when we introduce labels, like I said, right now it's really high level. They don't even realize they're using labels when they create a new Microsoft team. The label is actually infused into the the onboarding process of it. But that is not where it ends, because where you're going with it, you're taking it to the next level that I want to take Staples to, and that's to actually have them actively say, okay, I know what this document is. I'm creating it. It's extremely specific to a very minute part of the senior leadership, for example. This
Right.
has got to be really seriously locked down. I got to switch this label over to X, whatever X may be. In this case, it might be top secret. Well, if that's the case, we got to teach them how to do that. And one of the things I have found that is probably the most difficult thing, as fast as Microsoft continues to evolve and grow in the cloud space, there's no way to easily keep up with the training of the end users within our organization effectively.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things we've been trying to do is partner with education. I think that they've seen the vision for what Gen AI is going to do from a transformation perspective, and our executives are essentially mandating that all users are trained on AI tools and trained around Gen AI and acceptable use. And so I think what we're trying to do is kind of flex that muscle of, if the organization is leaning in that much on this technology, let's make sure from an IT perspective that the governance that we know should be happening, that we're catching that wave and essentially leveraging the energy around that, such that release planning, governance, support, release management, and kind of our information protection, data loss prevention, that we're basically locking those in as major milestones on our release plan.
Okay.
And we're trying to say we're not slowing it down. We're actually running in parallel. Those are milestones that we can all get behind. The education team is looking at things, and we're saying, hey, you're focused really broadly. Wouldn't it be great? Kind of come back to earth a little bit. Let's talk about some tactical tools and some of the techniques that are going to make such a big difference if we can do it right.
I think it's important that, sorry, David. I think it's important that we look at it's Copilot. It's not the pilot. It's there to be a tool to help you, like somebody nudging you saying, hey, why don't you do this? Or did you look at this? As opposed to the tool saying, do this. I'm telling you, you should do this. And I think the general public has that fear of that. But if we or Microsoft really makes a focus on understanding that this is a aid for you, you don't have to follow it, but we're helping you, just kind of an aid in there. I think that would go a long way to helping people understand and adopt it.
Absolutely. I like that a lot. And I think it does require a bit of a partnership, because cart before the horse is what we're trying to avoid as well here. One kind of little thing that I've been working on that I think is pretty cool, that's a little bit custom, but I think it's sometimes fun to see like what different organizations are doing. You can tell I've been working on with Ryan on this. But this idea of a power app that basically shows the tools almost like an app store. In fact, that's my vision, is I want an app store that essentially somebody can go to, and different parts of the business may choose different AI tools. So in this example, if engineering wants to use one tool and the business wants to use another tool, we can actually have it be security trimmed as to which tools are available to you, and even the idea that maybe it's requires approval, such that when you request it, it's got to go to your manager to get approval. But it essentially helps us educate, but also when they request it, we can essentially provide those training videos or training examples of do this, don't do this, and essentially build it right into the provisioning process of requesting the app, getting it assigned. Maybe they're not using it and we take it away. Now we know there's a self-service interface that we can point them at that says, hey, if you get deprovisioned, because you're not using the tool, we're not gonna, this is not, as much as there's certain people there's certain executives who want to make it birthright. I've found there's so many tools in this space that people just don't believe in, or they're not going to use it. But I want to make it easy to get if that's what they should be getting. And then there's some studios that they're like, sorry, we don't have the budget for it. And so the chargeback situation's not working out so well. And then others, it's like, yeah, there's 10 specific users I want to provide it to. So what we're doing is we're building in a little bit of a power app that essentially provides that kind of user adoption experience. And without saying, here's exactly how much it means to you, we can, this idea of kind of following in line with that idea of kind of what they do in Yelp, of being able to show apps that are a single dollar sign versus multiple dollar signs. We can kind of help an end user know, hey, this tool isn't free. We want you to help you understand what it means to the business. And if you're not using it, go ahead and unassign it. And otherwise we may, there may be chargeback involved, and we want to make sure that they're aware of that. So this is kind of a little app that Ryan and I have been working on, with that idea of being able to better manage licensing and add-ons in M365. And especially as it relates to the premium add-ons like Planner Premium, Project Plan 1, Plan 3, Plan 5, Visio Plan 1, Plan 2. There's so much chaos now in this whole add-on space that I absolutely want to make sure that we're doing a good job to educate users, because we're definitely having challenges with, and I would call Microsoft out on this. It's super, super challenging to understand the difference between Planner Plan 1, Plan 3, Plan 5, and Planner Premium. And, even Copilot makes a ton of mistakes when you're just trying to use the tool to understand how the licensing works, let alone the thousands of end users out there that are trying to figure out which licenses they need to do what features. So I thought this was kind of a clever idea.
I'm liking where you're going with that.
And just thank everybody for your time. If there's any questions, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but thanks for the time to be able to share this with you.
Well, we appreciate you presenting this to us. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Joel. Joel, do you have some time for any Q&A that we might have?
Yeah. I wasn't sure how much time I did have for Q&A, but yeah, I'm absolutely good for some Q&A.
Okay. We have a question in the front row.
You had all the innovation on the user base, but what about the admins that were like champions trying to help them? What kind of feedback are they getting?
Yeah. So the champions. Are you asking about?
Well, a champion is like trying to help this user community, but you're asking them all these things, all the surveys and all the things, but what feedback what are the admins getting out of that? Do they have a?
And when you say admins, just qualify what you mean by admins. Right?
The champion is trying to drive this user adoption.
Okay. Yeah, we have a weekly office hours where essentially it's Gen AI office hours. And so for people who are trying to be the super user, power user, people who want to do integration, who are essentially doing amazing things, I basically have an office hours where they can shine, they can share what they're learning and what's going on. And people who are maybe trying to wrap their heads around it, they can go to those office hours. But at the same time, we're doing kind of trickle campaigns around kind of content marketing. But as well, we're doing a road show, and the road show will basically hit all of our offices in person with a half day workshop where we get come to the room with your laptop. Let's play around. Let's get you understanding how you're lit up and how it works across the tools, and help you get more productive. And I think it's something. It's not just a one-time touch. It's something that people get excited at different times. They learn something and then they want to go try it out. And this is something that's going to continue to evolve, because different departments have different use case scenarios, and somebody will figure something out and then they want to share it, and other people will get up to speed, and we want that kind of information to percolate and to trickle across the organization, because every one of those use case scenarios is super, super powerful.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions in the room?
You had
Joel, go ahead.
No, Joel's left everyone speechless in the room. Go ahead, Dave.
I like the idea of the Power App. Do you actually foresee, so if they do hit the request, it actually dropping in, hey, you just requested Copilot. Oh, by the way, you will be required to do a half-day course. You will also have to sign this NDA, and actually drop in there, and beyond just
the Power App actually has there's the acceptable use that they need to understand and agree to. As well, it kicks off the training, and yeah, I've been debating back and forth around. So we have our bigger, broader release. We've got a few hundred users that have been using. We're trying to kind of bake off GPT and Copilot and get some when to use what kind of education out there of which departments should be using which tool, and maybe there's even some users who use both. It's not a full-on horse race where one wins. We're feeling like there are necessary use cases for multiple Gen AI tools, and so some of this is just helping. And going back to the Power App, yes, we want to facilitate as much of that experience and education as we can in the provisioning process.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to permanently borrow that. Ferb, I know what we're doing tomorrow.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's like building our own. I've been trying to come up with a clever name for it. Right now, it's something like it's our SaaS app store, or it's the cloud app store. You know what I mean? It's like, here's all these SaaS apps, all the Microsoft add-ons that are not full-on apps that you install on your machine, but I want to be able to gate those things, and I want people to be able to have all that rich education, but as well understanding the power of these things, how we can actually gate that a little bit more and provide some responsibility at the time that drops.
Nice.
Yeah.
We have a question in the room.
Joel, do you know of any public resources for laying out like a framework of any of these acceptable use sort of agreements? Or just any examples we can use as a baseline?
That's a really good one. I do know that there's some guidance from the protests in California around what creatives want to do and what they would prefer for humans to do versus what they're okay with AI doing. And some really good examples. I'll just give you kind of a few off the cuff. In terms of frameworks, I have no idea. But in terms of, some content that may be good, it's whatever. The way I'm kind of approaching this is this idea of there's two bad spaces, and the two areas that I kind of try and get away from is if you're building video games, you don't want to include open source in your games at all. And the reason I say that is because each of those, anything open source from a code perspective, may have special license agreements to it. And if you're using a Gen AI tool and it's borrowing something that it's learned from somewhere else, and it's governed by some non-commercial license, and all of a sudden you're sticking that in your code, that's a really, really bad thing. So that's actually one space we've really struggled with. Is it, as powerful as it is to be able to generate code, how can we 100% guarantee that the code that's being generated doesn't have anything borrowed from open source? And so today, our policy is you are not using the tool to generate code. You may be using it to debug. You may be using it to essentially read and understand code, but you're not today in our environment, you're not using it to generate code. And we're hoping that we're finding tools that will actually be able to understand what is from open source, so that maybe we can get ahead of that and address that space. The other one is around design. And what I mean by that is generating images. If you're generating images that are essentially, it's different, but it's similar. Where in the public space, if you're using Gen AI to generate an image, that's a more dangerous space than saying, I'm using AI to generate an image for internal use. And I'm of the opinion, and this is me standing alone, I'm not speaking for any company when I say this. I think that if I'm running an internal marketing campaign and I'm generating something, the terms of use for that internal non-commercial use of an image is a lot less risky than me using a Gen AI generated image that I'm going to be putting out publicly. So that's kind of a little bit of guidance I've personally picked up along the way. And that it's kind of where I'm sitting as I'm looking at things, where it's like if I'm writing something, wouldn't it be great if I could use it for coaching? Wouldn't it be great if I could use it for understanding? But I need to be careful around making sure that what I'm generating doesn't have any hallucinations in it and doesn't have any copyright material in it from somewhere else, even if it is fair use, as an example. I got to be much more careful if I'm going to be using it for commercial purposes.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yep.
Your question in the back?
I was just going to say, I'm aware of some governing frameworks, so I can send that out to the lists.
I'd love to see that too.
I'll send it out. And also the licensing and copyright for marketing materials that goes external is a large issue. So some companies are only using their own sources, their own models with only their own content.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Well, let's give Joel a round of applause. Great job, Joel.
Thanks, everybody.
So we have a few slides to close out the session, so don't jump off just yet. We are still having a call for speakers for the later part of this year. If you have something to share, we'd love to have you up here. So please go to that URL, scan the code. So in terms of next month, we have building Copilot plugins with and declarative Copilots with M365 with Bob German. Bob always gives a fantastic presentation, so
It's good.
you don't want to miss this one. We're also working with Mark Rackley. He's working on finalizing a topic that we'll have a chance to have him present in August. September onwards is still open, so please do submit a session if you're interested. In terms of upcoming community events, this is not comprehensive by any means, but the next big one on our radar is the Power Platform Conference taking place in Vegas in September. There's also an event being hosted here by Spyglass on September 19th around securing the cloud. It's free registration available there. Formerly SharePoint Saturdays, now Collab Days, will be taking place here in this building in October. This year they have moved it to a Friday. So hopefully this will not impact people's weekend plans. Also gives you a chance to justify getting a day out of the office if you can. The call for speakers for that closes at the end of this month. So if you are looking to speak at Collab Days and have not yet submitted a session, please do so before then. And last but not least on this list is Ignite. It's going to take place in person as well as online this year. They're moving the venue back to Chicago. It's a paid event in person, but it's also a free event online if you register. So there are a number of other calls, podcasts, groups available online virtually. If you go to the Patterns and Practices GitHub at pnp.github.io, lots of other great sessions and things to plug into there. There's additional recurring resources in the community that we found. We're always looking to expand this list. But if you're looking for more, there's a lot out there. Quick shout out to the other user groups in our area. Some are more active than others. I think we are probably one of the more active ones here, continuing to meet monthly, 10 years strong. So thanks for coming out. Looking forward to seeing everyone in future sessions. So we do have a small section here towards the end of just the community portion of this. But does anyone have any problems or any tips for anything related to Microsoft 365 that you're facing today, or that you've solved a really challenging issue that you'd like to share with the group here? Go ahead.
Last month, we talked about chunk size in terms of, ingesting PDFs and whatnot. And the implication was, I didn't necessarily agree with it, that, if I had a 400-page PDF, only the first 3 pages got indexed. Challenge that. I think that's not right. I found some information that leads to, in fact, I actually tried this. I took a 400-page PDF, chunked it, and looked at information, specifically looked on page 394 out of the 400-page document, and I picked it right up. So I was trying to get that to you, actually, and to the person that presented last month, but I can't do that. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, so and for those that weren't part of the conversation last month, we were talking about some of the token limits around the GPT models. They are continuing to expand those token sizes, but I think the latest one is still somewhere between 40 to 80 pages that it could comprehend in a single query. So if you ask Copilot to say, look at page 300 of this 400-page document, it might be smart enough to jump to that portion and kind of analyze what's around there. But if you feed it a 400-page document and you say summarize it, it's only going to be able to go up to that token limit that you have selected. So depending on which GPT model you have, I think the largest one is roughly 40 to 80 pages at the moment, but there's other models that are much smaller as well, especially like the GPT-3.
You're talking about chunking in like 512 megabytes, and the maximum is like thousands of files and 10 gigabit limit on all the files. I was just wondering, is M365 different on Copilot than it is with?
File size and token size are dramatically different too.
Yeah, I understand.
The token is specifically text, I believe, right? I'm not sure. Actually, I should clarify. I'm not sure how it breaks down images or videos that are consumed.
No, I was just talking about
as far as
text, PDFs and whatnot.
Yes, so we're talking about the OpenAI models, which is what Copilot is based on top of.
Yeah, so I wanted to send that to you. So I wanted to get some feedback with the group. Like maybe we're looking at different things.
Yeah, if you'd like to send that across, we can.
But how do I do it? I don't have a.
Just send an email to this invite. We can add it as a topic for next time.
That don't work. I sent that a month ago, and I don't know. Is there who do I send it to?
So you should have an Outlook invite for me for this meeting. You can send that to me. Okay. Anyone else running any problems or questions or want to share some tips? Yes.
Just may I add something that maybe ties into that last conversation we had with Joel on the phone. Microsoft has announced a Copilot copyright commitment, where it basically provides legal protection for users who claim copyright claims. I don't know if anyone's looked into detail. I think it's been announced fairly recently, but just a search on Copilot, Microsoft, and copyright. Whatever.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it looks like Joel unfortunately has dropped, but if you could send me that link, I'll pass that on to him. All right. Anyone else in person or online have any questions or challenges? All right, just means we're not using O365 enough if there's no challenges. Hey, Paul, I see your hand up. You gonna mute yourself?
Nope, all set. I missed the react with the thumbs up. Thank you.
All good, all good. All right, so thanks again to Turn Digital for being our platinum sponsor. Yay. And thank you to all of our past sponsors that have supported our group over the last decade.
Yay.
I'm going to stop the recording on this screen, but we always do like to have a little bit of hiring and looking for work segment.